In today's episode, we go over the most disturbing shark attacks told on this channel so far. From great white sharks biting people's heads off to a woman who was torn apart by a hungry shark on camera. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. These are the most disturbing shark attacks you will ever hear. Welcome to Final Affliction. Cruising in the depths of the world's oceans are sharks that have earned themselves a reputation as the most dangerous species of sharks, the great white sharks. They are equipped with rows of razor-sharp teeth that are unforgiving during their infamous sneak attacks. When great white sharks are looking to satisfy their large appetites, the last thing you want to do is be in their way. When these ruthless sea creatures decide to strike, they move with such precision and speed that they end up giving their victims no chance to react. Onlookers are left with no other choice than to watch in horror. Such was the case of a man named Randall Fry. A 50-year-old father of one, was an ocean enthusiast who loved to spend every waking moment in the expansive oceans. He was fascinated by sea life and captivated by the power of the ocean. The ocean was not only a place for him to fulfill his diving and sport fishing hobbies, but also the foundation of his entire career. It was his life. So on 15th of August 2004, same as any other suitable day, Randall could not resist the urge to go to the ocean. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, and the sea was calm and breathing with cadence. While seated at a seaside restaurant, Randall watched as the waves crawled gently toward the shore. The murmuring of the waves as they made their way to the beach was hypnotic. He felt as if the sea was calling to him. And so, together with his longtime diving buddies, Cliff Zimmerman and Red Bartley, he heeded the call, and they all set out to the Mendocino coast of abalone. The three had made it their afternoon mission to catch some abalone, a type of marine snail that was common in the area. Aboard the 28-foot fishing boat named Dolphin, the trio was bursting with excitement as the cool ocean breeze brushed against their bodies. They combed the turquoise ocean until they all agreed that the sheltered cove at Kybsilla Rock was the perfect spot for abalone hunting. On their way there, they made use of the fishing pole that was on board and caught a few lingcod. Their impromptu boat ride was off to a great start. 10 miles from Fort Bragg, they dropped their anchor. The trio had been at this cove several times before and knew it like the palm of their hands. So, before they could set foot in the cool, alluring waters, they quickly scanned the ocean for sharks or sea lions that the great white sharks were fond of trailing. Once the coast was clear, Randall wasted no time and jumped into the waters. The water was so refreshing. His heart was full. A few minutes later, Cliff joined him. Since abalones could only be caught through free diving in the 15-foot deep waters, all they had on was a wetsuit and mask. While Randy, as they were fond of calling him, was slowly drifting farther away from the boat, Cliff remained close by because he was having trouble with his equipment. For some reason, his mask kept fogging up. Bartley chose to stay behind and keep an eye out for any danger. While on the deck of the boat, he decided to keep himself busy. He took out his fishing rod, hooked the bait, and cast it into the water. Within no time, Bartley had landed a black rock cod before the rest could catch their first abalone. Randy was now 3 feet away from Cliff, who was trying to catch up but was still struggling with his mask. Afloat, they chatted away and made fun as their heads were bobbing up and down with every breath that the sea took. Randy was yearning to get started with the adventure and couldn't wait a minute longer for Cliff to finish fiddling with his equipment. And so he decided to dive deeper. Not wanting to miss out on the fun, Cliff hurriedly cleaned his foggy mask off and dipped his head into the water to suction his mask onto his head. As his face broke the surface of the water, the unexpected happened. He could feel the pressure of something big passing near him. He stuck his head out of the water and looked around, hoping to see the submarine or speedboat that had just gone past him. In a horrific turn of events, Cliff's eyes were met with a large dorsal fin sticking out of the water. All he knew and needed to know was that the fish was big enough to kill. Before his screams of terror could reach Randall and warn him of the impending danger, the blue ocean suddenly turned crimson. Out of nowhere, the 18-foot great white shark grabbed Randall by his throat and tore his head off, killing him instantly. Copious amounts of blood were seen gushing to the water's surface before both the shark and Randy disappeared into the murkiness of the water. For a moment, Cliff thought that he was right in the middle of a horror movie, but the now strong waves quickly slapped him back to his senses. Cliff, who had spent a good amount of his life on this coast, had heard of many previous shark attacks, but none was fatal. And for a shark attack as fatal as Randy's to happen right before his eyes, it was unbelievable. He could not shake the feeling that a few seconds ago, that could have been him. However, he was still not yet safe from the monstrous creature. He immediately dropped his weight belt and gathered all the energy left in him and frantically made a swim for the boat. He could not tell if the shark was on to him. With his heart about to burst from his chest, he pushed himself beyond his limits, praying and hoping that his body would propel him faster than the water-dwelling monster. Luckily, Bartley was there to yank him out of the water. Bartley, who had heard Cliff screaming at the top of his lungs, looked up only to see a pool of blood spreading on the water's surface. It was at this moment that he knew that there would be no more abalone hunting for Randall. They took a moment and looked around one more time, but they could neither see the shark nor their beloved friend. The blood, too, was gone. Cliff was still trembling and could barely catch his breath. Bartley quickly reached for his radio at the same time, trying to steer the boat, and made a mayday call for help. The duo began their agonizing ride back to the sandy shore. Within the nick of time, helicopters were hovering over the cave at Kybsilla Rocks, looking for Randall's body. Sadly, their efforts were fruitless. As dusk came, the team dispersed. Bartley began his drive back home, but first, he needed to make another call. He called Randy's mom and broke the news to her. The following day, in a haunting twist, while recounting their interaction with Randall, Cliff remembered that during one of their usual bunters, Randy had mentioned that a shark might get him in the future. Little did he know that the premonition would come true, and in the most horrific way possible, and that his friends would be left watching in horror. The only comfort that Randall's loved ones got was that earlier that day, a Coast Guard had recovered Randall's lifeless, headless body. Were it not for the wetsuit that had his name on it, it would have taken longer to identify him. But the horror was far from over. On September 8th, 3 weeks after the horrific incident, a beachcomber walking on 10 Mile Beach, north of Fort Bragg, found a head. Upon further investigations, it was identified by the Mendocino County authorities as belonging to Randall. Fatal shark attacks in this area were rare, and when consulted about the reasons for this one, experts strongly believe that the shark may have mistaken Randy for a seal. Others suspected that Bartley's decision to start fishing could have attracted the shark to the area. At the time of his death, Randall was a director of the Recreation Fishing Alliance and had dedicated himself to being a voice for the divers and fishermen near and far. His family and friends came together to spread his ashes in Maverick's Surf near Half Moon Bay. He spent his better days in the ocean and wanted to rest near it. Many described him as a generous man whose absence would be greatly felt by his community. Randy's colleagues termed him irreplaceable, and his death remains to be a chilly reminder of the unforeseen dangers that are lurking in the alluring waters of the ocean, waiting to bite the next unsuspecting person in the water, bringing them to their tragic, final affliction. Heather Boswell was working on a 6-month term in the galley of the Discoverer. The Discoverer was a U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration research ship, voyaging 30 nautical miles off Isla Sala y Gomez and 300 miles east of Easter Island. The date was March 23, 1994, and the mood was a joyous one as the crew had been given a day off. Some crew members decided to sleep in, while a few of the more adventurous members decided to take an open ocean swim. There was a collective cheer as 9 of the crew members stripped off and jumped into the crystal clear water. Among them were Heather Boswell and Phil Buffington. The group swam and snorkeled, enjoying the freedom of the open, balmy waters. 3 other crew members were monitoring the swimmers in the water from a rigid inflatable boat. At the same time, another watched from aboard the Discoverer ship, scanning the open ocean for deep-sea predators. For almost 90 minutes, the 9 were having the time of their lives, somersaulting through the water before someone shouted, "Shark!" Heather and most of the crew brushed it as a joke and continued swimming, but they were wrong. One of the ocean's deadliest predators had its beady eyes set on crew member Phil Buffington. Had Phil not brushed the warning, or at the very least looked beneath the clear waters, he would have seen the 18-foot black shadow of the great white shark below him. The massive beast stealthily sized him before positioning itself just below him. And then it struck. The shark's powerful jaws clamped down on his thigh near the knee and tried to drag him underwater, where it would show him who was boss. Phil was shaken. The shark had caught him completely off guard. Amidst the excruciating pain and fear, he mastered courage and quickly landed a blow on the shark's head, which sent it spiraling away as it let go of his foot. The others saw the incident, and since they didn't want to become this vicious creature's next victim, they quickly began swimming to safety, something they should have done at the very first warning. Again, someone yelled a warning of a shark. This time around, no one was taking any chances with their lives. They swam towards safety, but unfortunately, all did not make it on board, as it was a bit too late for Heather Boswell, who was 25 feet from the rest of the crew. She had wandered too far from the ship. The monitor watching from aboard the ship saw the great white swim toward Boswell. The other crew members, who had already swam to safety, watched as the shark submerged. It then shot up from the depths and, with its massive jaws wide open, grabbed Boswell by the right ankle. A crew member on the rigid inflatable boat threw a broom handle for Boswell to grab, but before Boswell was completely out of the water, the great white struck again. The shark sunk its serrated teeth into Boswell's left leg about mid-thigh and then pulled her back into the water. The water around her turned red, colored by her blood. And then suddenly, all went silent. The shark had disappeared under the surface, and Boswell was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, the ocean was dead. Nothing moved. And then, after what seemed like an eternity, a loud splash tore the silence. Boswell wasn't ready to go down without a fight. She had beaten all odds and managed to resurface. The petrified crew members on the boat grabbed her hands as they attempted to pull her on board. Unfortunately for Boswell, the great white still had its sharp teeth deep in her flesh and wasn't ready to let go. What followed was a tug-of-war with the crew trying to free Boswell from the jaws of death. Suddenly, Boswell heard a pop sound and hoped that it was just a dislocation of her leg as the crew managed to pull her onto the safety of the boat. She let out a sigh of relief. She was finally free. Meanwhile, a shark attack warning had already been broadcasted on the Discoverer ship's PA system. A crew member cleaning his pistol after a target practice heard the broadcast and rushed to see what the commotion was all about. He saw the shark swimming towards someone climbing the ship's ladder and without hesitation fired several rounds at the great white. The shark veered away as it swam towards the stern of the ship. The crew member followed it and fired 2 more rounds, and he watched as the shark became motionless. He had killed the monstrous predator. Heather Boswell, who was lying on the boat, trying to catch her breath, was yet to come to the realization of her state. A stinging sensation from her left leg made her look at her thighs, and that was when it dawned on her that her left leg was missing. The pop sound she had heard earlier was the shark parting with her leg. With her brain now processing the information, her nervous system woke from slumber and the pain kicked in. She was hoisted from the inflatable boat to the ship, where a crew member used his belt as a tourniquet. Phil Buffington was immediately escorted below deck as his feet were throbbing in pain. While his injuries were not as fatal as Boswell's, his left thigh had several gashes, while his right knee and thigh had deep puncture wounds. Medics had to sew him with 50 stitches. At the sickbay, Heather Boswell's left leg had been severed mid-thigh. Her right leg had large gashes and puncture wounds. She had lost blood in large volumes and was in a state of shock. By the time she was placed on the bed, she was cold and unresponsive with no heartbeat. The medics immediately administered IV fluids, and shortly a pulse was detected. By evening, she was stable and fairly made it through the night. At 7 a.m. the following day, the crew prepared her for medical evacuation to a medical facility on land. They turned her on her side, ready to shift her to a stretcher, but the 130-pound Boswell was in such a fragile state that she collapsed. The Holter monitor went haywire as she lost all her measurable blood pressure. Her breathing then became shallow, and the medical team immediately repositioned her. They then did CPR and a sternum rub as she slowly resuscitated and restabilized. The medical team from land arrived on the ship and decided the best way to move Boswell was by the rigid inflatable boat. She was placed aboard the boat and then lowered off the ship and onto the water. Boswell was then taken to a local clinic before being transported to Panama, where she underwent surgery at an Army hospital. The crew members, whose quick actions helped save Heather Boswell's life, received awards and medals of honor and bravery. Heather Boswell fully recovered from her puncture wounds, but had to wear a prosthesis on her left leg for the rest of her life. When asked what it is like being eaten by a shark, she noted that it didn't hurt as much as she expected, but felt like a puppy chewing on your finger. Her incredible survival story is by far the most detailed, deadly attack of a great white shark, and was thus no shock that it was featured on the Discovery Channel's Shark Week. Millions of people around the world were amazed by Heather's story of how she narrowly escaped a great white shark attack, as well as her final affliction. Many different things can trigger a shark attack, although some are less well known than others. We're all familiar with the stories of surfers being attacked because they look like seals from below, and we know that a splashing motion can attract sharks, thinking it's a struggling or injured animal. Aside from the obvious, there's new research that is still taking place to suggest some other triggers for shark attacks, such as blood in the water, or more strangely, human urine. This may explain why 7-year-old Alicia Webster was attacked while swimming in New Zealand. The event has certainly sparked some controversy regarding why some sharks attack humans. New Zealand is not exactly famed for its shark attacks, with the country having a low occurrence rate and only a couple of reports annually. That being said, there are over 70 shark species that inhabit their waters, including the infamously dangerous great white shark, which may convince some people to stay out of the water altogether. For others, the ocean offers an escape. Sailors in particular love to make the most of their time on the open ocean. The Webster family were avid sailors who, in 2005, decided to take their yacht to Malakula so that they could have some time away from home on the boat. They shared the yacht with the Morecambe family, who they had a common love for sailing with. They had borrowed each other's boats in the past, but recently had decided that they should simply share a boat, and then they could also go on holiday together. This trip, however, was just for family, so Alicia was going to spend as much time with her parents, siblings, and grandparents as possible. As the family arrived at Malakula with their yacht, they were immediately disappointed by the weather, which was particularly cloudy and gave the island a gloomy look. They landed on the shore and were immediately greeted by Le Pen Tillerson, who was a teacher living on the island. He saw Alicia swimming in the water and warned the family that they shouldn't allow their daughter to swim in the ocean, as it was a popular area for sharks. He explained that many fishing boats regularly came to stop in this area, which attracted the attention of sharks who wanted an easy meal. As a result, he never let his children swim in the sea. There were various freshwater places nearby that would be much safer, and so Le Pen suggested that the family move away from the beach in search of these areas. They agreed that they would want to keep their daughters safe, and so moved inland to have lunch away from the water's edge. However, once they were finished eating, the family returned to the water despite the warnings. Le Pen came back to the family to warn them once again of the dangers that the sharks would pose to them. They told Alicia to get out of the water again, but this time seemed annoyed with Le Pen's interruptions and hoped that they would be left alone if they complied with his warnings. Satisfied that they understood the dangers, Le Pen returned to his home and continued with his day, leaving the family to relax on the beach. However, the family would soon make a devastating mistake, which would cost little Alicia her life. After Le Pen was out of sight, Grant and Cherie Webster told their daughter that she could return to the water, as they were convinced that Le Pen was exaggerating. There were plenty of other local children that were playing in the water, so why should their daughter be excluded after they sailed all the way here? They sat on the shore as they watched their daughter paddle in the shallows, happy that they had raised such a water-confident child. She loudly announced to them that she needed to pee, and they assured her that it was okay if she peed in the ocean. That's where it would end up eventually anyways. They kept an eye on her, but trusted that she was fine. She was used to the water after all. They were more preoccupied with the local children, who looked a bit scared about something. While quickly trying to get out of the water, the parents watched them with interest, but when they turned back to Alicia, she was nowhere to be seen. How was that possible? They had only looked away for a second, and she was only a few meters into the water, barely deep enough to reach her stomach. As they scanned the water for any sign of her, she burst through the water and back to the surface screaming. Alicia's father, Grant, leapt into action and sprinted towards his screaming daughter. He pulled her out of the water and laid her on the sand, desperately trying to stop the blood that was pouring from her leg. Everyone was panicking. The children were running from the water in fear, trying to escape the blood that was gradually turning the shoreline red. Alicia had been attacked by a shark. That much was clear, but her parents still couldn't figure out the details of the attack. They hadn't even seen the shark that had grabbed her. All that mattered at this point was to try and save their daughter. Her left leg had been completely severed at the thigh, along with several bite wounds across her entire left side. She was bleeding profusely and growing colder with every second, so they knew they didn't have much time. Grant picked her up, and together, the parents used a dinghy from their yacht to take Alicia back to the mainland. Once they arrived at the shore, they flagged down a lorry and begged the driver to take them to a hospital. Upon seeing the pale and motionless child presented to him, the driver took them to the closest hospital, 30 minutes away. Unfortunately, after arriving at the hospital nearly an hour later, Alicia was pronounced dead on arrival. There was nothing to be done. Her family was beside themselves with grief and blamed themselves for not heeding the advice of Le Pen, who told them of the dangers that hid beneath the waves. If only they had listened. After it was announced that the child had died, the locals were heartbroken. They tried to identify the shark that was responsible for the attack, but no one had been able to see the attack except Alicia, so there was no way to know the species. In the days following the attack, local canoeists reported seeing a large tiger shark patrolling the waters where the girl was attacked, leading many to believe that this was the shark responsible. Although possible, a great white shark was also spotted just 2 days before the accident. so we will most likely never know. Her body was quickly returned home with her family so that they were able to pay their respects and remember their child as the happy, carefree child that she was, rather than the horrific way in which she died. Despite these details, we still don't know one of the most important details. Why did the mystery shark attack little Alicia to begin with? There is one theory that is widely debated that is relevant to this case in particular. Are sharks attracted to human urine, and could this be a cause for an attack? It is widely explained that while sharks are attracted to the scent of blood in the ocean, they are not as interested in urine, as it doesn't indicate that someone is injured in the same way that blood would. That being said, sharks have a highly developed sense that they use to hunt, meaning that they are high-tuned to any and all bodily fluids that may enter the water. So by urinating in the ocean, Alicia may have alerted the shark that killed her of her presence in the water, which led it to coming to investigate. Other swimmers reported feeling the shark pass below them without attacking them, so it is strange that the animal seemingly beelined to Alicia. If it was just hunting, then it would have attacked the children in the deeper water, as it would have been able to easily overpower them and drag them underwater while it waited for them to drown. Instead, it chose a small girl who was near the shoreline, where it would be a less effective hunter and risk beaching itself. As a result, this had led some to speculate that this shark was attracted to her urine in the water, although these claims are not backed up by scientific theory. Some would argue that urine would actually dissuade a shark from attacking, as it would interfere with its ability to smell blood, its main target. However, the attack on Alicia begs to differ, and her death serves to remind people of the mystery of shark behavior. Next time you swim off to pee in the ocean, you may be unknowingly attracting your final affliction.
Bantry Bay is a bay found in New South Wales, Australia. It is a very isolated area with very little development and instead was turned into Garigal National Park due to its areas of outstanding beauty. With thousands of trails easily accessible to the public, this bay is a very popular hiking spot with access to the water below. One of the most unique aspects of this area is the Aboriginal rock art, which contains about 82 figures depicting people, animals, and daily life. It is an excellent record of the lives of the Aboriginal people and allows people to learn more about a fascinating culture. The 1940s were a particularly tumultuous time in history, mostly due to the ongoing battles during World War II between 1939 and 1945. Throughout the world, people were evacuated from their countries to somewhere considered to be much safer. One such place was Hong Kong, where many British families were situated, and in 1940 were told that they must leave as Hong Kong was becoming too dangerous. 5,000 women and children were evacuated to Australia as a result, specifically relocating the majority to New South Wales. Many families were split up as the men were expected to remain in combat, later becoming prisoners of war. Although thought to be a haven for the newcomers, this was not the case for many of the families when they arrived. It was an incredibly difficult time and meant that those that were evacuated had to adapt to the Australian climate and culture very quickly and without much preparation. One such family was that of Denise Birch, who was 13 at the time of her evacuation. 2 years after Denise Rosemary Birch and her family emigrated to New South Wales, they began to feel very settled in their new community. The war was in full force, but they were relatively untouched now, aside from the fear of losing their brother and father, who were now Japanese prisoners of war. On a day much like any other, 15-year-old Denise and a group of her friends decided to go to the beach together. It was Boxing Day, and the group had enjoyed spending the holidays together with their families and friends, acclimating to their new surroundings quickly with an Australian welcome. The group ranged in age from 15 to 18 years old, with 4 boys and 4 girls. The weather was perfect. It was a sunny day with crystal clear waters that invited them to enter. There had been a few sharks seen nearby, but this was not unusual, and they had not heard of an attack for quite some time. They assumed that the area must be safe as there were no warnings posted anywhere to dissuade them. At 9 a.m., they left the shore in 2 small boats, stopping for lunch at Ironside Point, a small harbor found in Bantry Bay with sparkling rock pools at low tide. While the rest of the group was eating, 2 of the boys decided that they wanted to go swimming. They paddled away from the shore until they were about 20 meters away and the water was much deeper, allowing them to dive and swim without the risk of hitting any rocks. They were having a great day, enjoying the cool waters and the hot sun, the threat of war seemingly forgotten. Denise was sitting near the shore, trying to cool off and enjoying her lunch with the other girls. They were chatting excitedly about school and their plans after graduation in the next few years. Suddenly, Denise felt a sharp pain in her leg. She looked down and saw, to her horror, that a large bull shark had grabbed her leg. She screamed out in pain and fear, but was quickly dragged into the water, falling backwards and under the waves. Her friends saw this and panicked, screaming to the 2 boys in the water that a shark was circling the area. They swam away from the area, knowing that they would likely be next if they stayed in the water, while those on shore tried to save their friend. Denise didn't have enough time to grab a breath as she was pulled under the water. Although she had been in about 2 feet of water, the shark had been determined to take her as it dragged her further and further into deeper water where it knew it would be able to finish her off. She knew that if she could just get her legs free of this animal, she stood a chance of escaping with just the injuries on her legs. She struggled against the animal, but it was tightly embedded into her leg with no intention of letting go, knowing that it had its next meal laid out. Suddenly, the shark pulled her deeper underwater, holding her beneath its body to slowly drown her. She could feel that she was running out of air and began to panic, striking the animal with her fists, but instead of letting her go, it began to shake her by her legs. It ripped further into her limbs, tearing away her skin and muscle from her leg, causing immense agony. She tried to scream, but she was trapped underwater, unable to escape. Unable to breathe. The friends grabbed rocks and branches from the shoreline and began pelting the shark with them, throwing them with immense force to scare and hurt the animal enough for it to give up. They hadn't seen Denise for some time now, and the ever-growing pool of blood that was on the surface of the water was scaring them. They thought of shouting for someone, but they were the only ones there. The teenagers were alone and fighting a shark for their friend's life. After what felt like a lifetime, their shots hit the shark enough times for it to flee the scene, leaving the group to watch the water for their friend. They hoped that she would struggle to the surface, gasping for air and needing help, but this did not happen. After a painstaking wait, Denise's body floated to the surface, dead. The friends entered the water to check on their friend, but she was already dead. As they pulled her from the water, they were horrified to see the extent of the damage. Her legs were torn apart as she was pale from blood loss, suggesting that this was ultimately her cause of death rather than drowning. They worked together to pull her from the water and quickly rang their parents, begging them to come and help them and that their friend was dead. Denise's family was quickly informed, and when her mom arrived at the scene of her daughter's death, she was beside herself. She was inconsolable, cursing the shark and what it had done to her family. Her older sister Pamela was already present, having been with Denise and their friends. She witnessed the whole attack and was in shock, unable to speak to anyone about what she had seen. The police were soon called, although there was nothing that they could do, and they removed Denise's body from the beach. It was determined that the attack was unprovoked as Denise had not seen the shark or antagonized it in any way, therefore ruling her death as an accident. Denise was buried soon after the attack at St. Andrew's Cathedral. It was a large funeral as the community came together to support the family and give their condolences for the freak attack. Her death shocked the public as she was so young and full of life, taken too soon. Her father and brother were not able to attend as they were still prisoners in Japan, but word was sent to inform them of the accident and the death of their family member. It must have been heartbreaking, thinking that you have sent your family away to be safe and out of reach from the bombs, only for your youngest child to be killed by a shark. There was another shark attack in the area soon after on January 4th, where a 28-year-old woman named Zaida Stedman was swimming in the shallows. She was attacked and pulled underwater in a similar style to Denise Birch, except Zaida was bitten in two by the animal. When the authorities investigated the attack, they ruled that it was also a bull shark, quite possibly the same shark that had killed young Denise. As it had escaped any retribution for her death, it believed it could escape another killing, so it attacked Zaida. The sharks in this area were not previously known to be aggressive, but bull sharks are considered to be the most dangerous sharks to humans due to their natural aggressive tendencies. They know where they stand in the food chain, and so humans are seen as just another prey species to them. Despite efforts from locals and authorities, the shark responsible was never caught, and people were simply advised to stay out of the waters of Bantry Bay, as they would likely be attacked by the shark, where they too would meet their terrifying final affliction. This is a shocking reminder of the dangers faced by divers and fishermen every day. This particular shark attack took place off the coast of Vanuatu Island, the second largest island of Fiji. Known for its natural beauty, its rugged mountains and hills are covered in dense rainforest, providing a haven for a range of wildlife. Its fringes are comprised of sandy beaches, coral reefs, and the deep blue of the Pacific Ocean. Maika Tabua was a 44-year-old father of 7 from the village of Naikaki. He had been diving and fishing in the seas off the island for more than 10 years. On March 10, 2016, he stepped into the water with a group of friends never to return. The group of them were free diving for bêche de mer, otherwise known as sea cucumbers. This type of fishing is a common activity among local communities in Fiji. The echinoderms are served up as a delicacy in places like China, where they are often exported to. In fact, sea cucumber exports from Fiji amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. Although the Fijian sea cucumber fishery has been fished for over 200 years, it has now come under serious threat from overfishing in recent years. For the time being, fishing for them with scuba diving gear has been banned until stocks recover. However, in 2016, free diving to harvest these unusual animals was an activity that Maika was well versed in. He would take a deep breath, submerge beneath the waves, and dive down to the ocean floor, plucking the 30-centimeter-long sea cucumbers from the sea floor and placing them in his mesh bag was something he did for 2 to 4 hours a day until he had enough to sell to a middleman at the market. From there, the sea cucumbers were boiled, dried, salted, and sold to a large company before being exported to Asia. On this particular occasion, he and his fishing companions spread out in the water, each one of them diving down to search for the sea cucumbers that littered the underwater ground. They fished near the mouth of the Yanaway River, where it flowed into the sea. The influx of fresh water provided nutrients for the marine life that lived nearby. The shallows were awash with wildlife. Marine algae attracted small fish, the small fish attracting bigger ones, and those attracting sharks. There are many different species of shark that frequent Fijian waters. These range from reef sharks to bull and tiger sharks. They scour the coastline and search for prey and even enter the rivers from the sea. As Maika filled his mesh bag, he had attracted unwanted attention. A shark was on the hunt nearby. It honed its senses on the fishermen. As the population of sea cucumbers has reduced, Fijian fishermen have to risk their lives diving in deeper and deeper water. Maika and the others, however, were in relatively shallow water near the reef. Maika was closest to the predator. It would have taken him completely by surprise. Its rapid speed, precise attack, and powerful jaws would have caused catastrophic damage to the fisherman in seconds. He wouldn't have time to cry out for help or fight back. The murkiness of the water, caused by the currents where the river met the sea, made spotting a predator approaching almost impossible. Minutes after the attack, when Micah had been killed almost instantly, his friends bobbed up to the surface. They had caught a fair amount of sea cucumbers and now swam to the shore to take stock of their catch and regroup. They looked around for Micah. He was nowhere to be seen. But as they scanned the water, they spotted something. It made their hearts leap, and a sense of dread came over them. There, bobbing in the water, was a body. Two of the men, Elisa Tuinawaria and Simone Ligavaki, who happened to be Micah's cousins, dived into the water. They made a rapid dash to the body. When they got there, they had the shock of their lives. It was definitely Micah, but in a gruesome reality, his head and left arm were missing, and he had huge bite marks taken from his thighs. His body floated vertically in the water, his feet still dangling beneath its surface. The men dragged him to shore, and in shock and terror, they wrapped his body up and drove him to Savu Savu Hospital. The doctors confirmed it was a shark attack and, at the time of the media report, were awaiting expert analysis to determine what species had been responsible. Micah had died doing something he loved. He had been with friends and family, but his life had been cut tragically short. The attack on the young family man sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community. His wife, Asanati Kima, and children were obviously traumatized by the news. The police conducted an investigation and a search for Micah's remains ensued. Only his face mask was found. Fernando de Noronha is a beautiful archipelago consisting of 21 islands 220 miles off the Brazilian coast. Covered in volcanic rock and fringed by golden sands, they made a stunning location for tourists. Playa do Soeste, also known as Soeste Bay, is a popular beach located on the island of Fernando de Noronha. It is known for its calm and clear waters, making it a great spot for snorkeling and diving to see the rich marine life of the area. This particular beach was voted the best beach in the world on TripAdvisor early in 2015. Just months later, on the 21st of December 2015, that would soon change, and terror would grip the tourist hotspot. 32-year-old accountant Marcio Di Castopalma and his wife were snorkeling off the very same beach. Despite the renowned clear waters, the water was a little murky on this day. With his head dipped beneath the warm Brazilian sea, Marcio swam towards some of the clearer water. He was watching some of the fish swim by. Their bright colors were mesmerizing, their movements agile as they flitted left and right. As he turned his head to look the other way, Marcio came face to face with a shark. It had completely taken him by surprise. It had swum upon him in seconds, and now its toothy grin stared Marcio directly in the face. Alarmed by its sudden appearance, Marcio began to swim away, but as he did so, it bit into his arm. It shook him violently, dragging him down to the seafloor. Marcio let out an underwater cry as the horror unfolded. He could feel the pressure of thousands of years of evolution clamp down on his arm. The shark pulled and tugged so hard that Marcio's arm was severed from his body. The release allowed him to surface. When he bobbed up, he gasped for air and screamed for help. Luckily for him, British man Barney Lancaster Owen had been swimming in the exact same spot only 10 minutes earlier. The 36-year-old Brit had been living in Brazil for 3 years and was on a family holiday with his Brazilian-born wife Isabel and their 2 children, 6-year-old Theodora and 4-year-old Tiago. Barney was drying himself on the golden sand, toweling himself after an exhilarating snorkel. He looked out across the water and then heard the Portuguese cry for help. All of a sudden, he spotted the commotion of Marcio's attack. At first, he thought that the young Brazilian was messing around with his wife. But then the water frothed and bubbled red. The young man was screaming and shouting, desperately trying to pull himself out of the jaws of the shark. With no regard for his own safety, Barney jumped into the water. He swam over to the troubled Brazilian. When he got to him, he saw the extent of his injuries. He was shocked to see Marcio's right arm missing. The lower arm had been taken off by the shark. The bone was sticking out and the muscle was torn open. Barney grabbed the man around the torso and began helping him to shore. Then he stopped. He asked Marcio if he wanted him to search for his missing arm in case it could be saved. In a calm manner, Marcio replied that he just wanted to get out of the water as quickly as possible. He was terrified the shark would come back for more. Whilst pushing through the water with the injured Marcio, it suddenly hit Barney how dangerous his rescue mission was. They were leaving a significant trail of blood behind in the water. The shark could be circling below them. He had to put himself in harm's way to save the life of a complete stranger. But still he powered through the water towards the beach. Luckily, they both made it back to shore without further incident. They were at the far end of the beach. There was no one else in sight apart from Marcio's wife, who was in shock and unable to help. Barney knew he had to act fast. He carefully took Marcio's life jacket off as well as his goggles. He threaded his severed arm stump through the armhole of the life jacket. Blood poured from the open wound. Marcio held his severed stump up above his head with his other hand as he and Barney half walked, half stumbled 400 yards along the beach to the nearest beach shop. Marcio remained incredibly calm. He just focused on taking one step in front of the other, keeping his breathing steady and holding on to his stump. When they got there, Marcio slumped down. Barney grabbed a sarong to fashion a tourniquet. He tied it tightly around Marcio's severed arm in an attempt to stem the bleeding. Emergency services were called and Marcio was rushed to the archipelago's only hospital. Surgeons patched them up as best they could, but the next day he was transferred to Hospital de la Restauración on the mainland where he underwent surgery. After the attack, Barney found out the beach they were swimming on was a known feeding ground for sharks. The most likely species for the attack on Marcio was a tiger shark. It was the first shark attack at the beach in living memory. Although most recorded shark attacks on humans are caused by great whites, tiger sharks are thought to be responsible for the most unprovoked attacks. Globally, there are around 50 to 70 shark attacks each year, with 5 to 15 being fatal. Considering the huge number of people who enter the water each year, attacks are incredibly rare, and you would have to be incredibly unlucky to encounter one. 60-year-old John Merrick was enjoying a pre-birthday swim off Makua Beach, Oahu, Hawaii. It was June 24, 2003, and retired accountant John was swimming with his wife, Stephanie, in the crystal-clear waters of the Pacific Ocean. They were about 150 meters from shore, where a few tourist boats had congregated. The reason for the outing was to watch and swim with spinner dolphins. Renowned for their acrobatic displays, spinner dolphins are a sight to behold. As John and Stephanie dropped into the water that day, they were amongst 6 other people, all there to witness the pod of 30 to 40 dolphins leaping out of the water. If they had known what marine biologist John Naughton had known, they may have remained on the boat. John Naughton was a member of the Hawaii State Shark Task Force and worked for the National Marine Fisheries Service. He and his colleagues had noticed a change in the behavior of great white sharks off the coast of Hawaii over the past 2 years. Although sightings of this species of shark are very rare near Hawaii, unlike tiger sharks, it had been noted that they were beginning to hunt spinner dolphins. In fact, to swim with spinner dolphins in a large pod was putting yourself at risk. Any change in the dolphin's behavior could be a sign of imminent danger. And that is just what happened. John dipped his face below the surface of the water. He enjoyed watching the splashes of the dolphins underwater as they landed after their aerial acrobatics and watched as they were surrounded briefly by a swarm of bubbles. The pod came together and swam several feet below John, Stephanie, and the rest of the group. It was incredible the speed they could swim at with only the slightest flicking of their tails. John and Stephanie had done this many times before. They were both fond of the sea, and being able to watch these majestic animals was both enjoyable and exhilarating. As John swam above the pod, they suddenly took off like rockets. Beating away into the distant blue, John was momentarily puzzled by their behavior. Then he felt a sharp tug on his foot. He didn't immediately recognize the sensation at first. It had taken him by surprise. Whatever it was, it had squeezed John's foot for a moment and then let go. John's foot stung. It felt like sharp pricks all over it. He turned to look around. As he did so, a large silvery body swam beneath him. That's when he recognized it was a shark. John's immediate thought was for the safety of his wife. He wasn't concerned with his bite at the time because it wasn't too painful. He was intent on getting between the shark and his wife as it loitered in the area, swimming slowly beneath them. He lifted his head above the surface of the water and shouted for Stephanie to get out of the water. When he looked back at the shore, he knew it was too risky for them to swim that far with a predator beneath them. When he looked at his foot underwater, it was bleeding badly. He knew his fresh blood would only entice the animal, so he called a nearby tourist boat. John and Stephanie swam as fast as they could to the boat. It was 60 feet away. The thought of the shark trailing them filled them with terror. The boat's skipper, Victor Lozano of Dolphin Excursions Hawaii, scanned the sea surface for any sign of the shark. Mercifully, John and Stephanie made it to the rigid inflatable, and Victor hauled them on board. They both lay there, breathless. Victor applied first aid to John's foot. The bite, although it only lasted a second or two, had left deep tooth marks on his foot and ankle. It had torn through John's skin and possibly fractured the bones. Victor elevated John's foot, applied pressure, and wrapped it in a bandage. He motored the couple to shore, where John was transferred to Waianae Coast Comprehensive Health Clinic. There was an orthopedic surgeon at the clinic who tended to John's injury. After receiving dozens of stitches, John was released the very same day. The surgeon said that whilst it can take up to 4 weeks to fully heal, John was lucky the bite did not damage any ligaments or tendons. It is likely the shark let John go as he was a case of mistaken identity. They generally go for blubbery animals, and John's ankle was far from that. At the time, John was swimming with the pod of dolphins, which is why the shark had bitten and then immediately released him. John celebrated his 61st birthday the day after the attack. He said he hasn't been put off swimming in the sea and will likely continue to swim with dolphins in the future, as it is something he and his wife really enjoy doing.